So today I'm going to step over Godot's source code. So I was wrong, slightly wrong, about the child process thing. So I don't know for sure, but I think that when you compile the project so that you get the executable that is going to have the project manager version, when you run that version of the executable, then that version is going to create a child process once you select a project, which is going to open the editor. But I think that if you, uh, the second part, I'm pretty sure that when you compile with the flag variables to compile for the editor version, which requires you to have a project, it requires you to have a project. So you have to pass the project. You pass either this flag here or just one of the dashes with the E, and then you have to pass the path, and this is going to be the path that contains your project, if I remember correctly. Or maybe it contains the executable. But if you do that, then it creates when the program starts, when the program executes, it's gonna open the editor version straight from the beginning. So when that's the case, then you don't need, it's not gonna launch a child process. So the reason why it wasn't showing step over things there, it was just because I didn't have the breakpoints. So I went there on the editor codes and I put a bunch of breakpoints, and now it's showing everything that is happening to create the editor. So what I'm gonna do also, I'm studying Vulkan to understand more, because turns out that Vulkan is very different in the way that you initialize the shaders and that you pass the shaders. The pipeline is very similar, but the way that you do things is very different than OpenGL. So like the thing that I'm trying to clarify more now is exactly how, because I want you to understand what kind of, I already know what kind of shaders are being used because they have a page on the documentation and they wrote down a bunch of files that they tell you on one of those pages. I don't remember where I saved. Was custom Godot learning. Here. So there's all these files that have a bunch of different shaders that are used, and they allow you to use, and they also allow you to create your own shaders on the editor. But I'm just trying to understand what kind of shaders are used to create the editor scene, and to clarify how the camera is going to be, how the values of the camera that are initialized on the C++ code are passed to the shader to update the values and this kind of stuff that I was doing on the other project on OpenGL. So essentially how to update uniforms and how do they create the matrices that represent the camera coordinates and those kinds of things. So I can clarify how to translate the project that I was working on into using Godot's engine instead. So I'm just gonna focus on trying to use the engine the same way that the editor does. That's what I'm trying to do now. And in order to clarify that, I have to understand more how Vulkan works, because I think that the version that I have there is probably selecting Vulkan, because I haven't seen anything related to OpenGL functions. I went on the codes and then I searched for the names that OpenGL uses to create the program, and I found some files, but like on the execution, I couldn't find anything as I step over. So this is the thing that is very confusing. And there's a lot of different things going on, so it's kind of hard to understand. But basically, the main thing that the editor is so the way that it works is that you have the engine, then you're gonna go through the main setup function, which is gonna set everything, set all the classes with the data, register a bunch of classes on the class DB database, and prepare all the classes. Then you're gonna have the main loop, and before the main loop, we're gonna have the main start function, and this is the function that is gonna set up the main loop class on the engine, and the main loop class is the thing that is going to call the function to run the game loop. And the main loop has another class which is the scene tree, and that's the main class that is used to manage the scenes. So as far as I understand now, all the scene switching does is just change what node is being displayed from the main scene tree. So it's different than the way that I was trying to do on the other project, because on the other project I was thinking about, I have two different separate, I had the scene tree, but it was just for the renderer, and then I was uh, doing the finite state machine to change between different scenes. So it was like changing from different trees using a finite state machine on the previous pattern that I was trying to implement, which I didn't like that much because then it creates the circular dependency because you need to initialize the engine with a scene, and then on the scene you need to have a function that is going to tell the engine to change what scene is currently being displayed. But I think on Godot they do it differently. So they only use one scene tree, and the way that they change scenes is just by changing what is the main nodes on the current scene tree. But it's very complicated. But I think the main function that has a bunch of stuff related to the editor after everything is set up is a function that is going to traverse the tree, the nodes of the tree, and then it's going to update everything. It's going to propagate events. And I think that's the function where it's going to call a bunch of, because the editor is just a node on the tree. So editor node inherits from node, which is the abstract class that they use to determine what's going to be shown, what objects are going to be shown on the scene. And that nodes creates a bunch of other nodes because obviously it's a hierarchy, and those nodes create the elements, so as far as I understand now. Oh, maybe I'm gonna do something else before I'm gonna start this timer. So I was gonna do, I tried to do yesterday, so I'm gonna run the executable here, but it didn't work because you need to have export templates, and I didn't understand. So I assume that like is a type of file you need to export the projects, and I assume it's similar to a JSON file that is gonna tell the specifications. But the issue is that I don't have there. There is a path that they usually put, which is app roaming on the users. So I remember seeing the path, I don't know how I got that. I have an option to download from the site, but I don't like that very much because obviously I don't understand what the file is. So I would like to understand what is the file. Maybe I should open on VS Code. Just gonna put some music. So what I'm trying to do, I created this list of so I wrote down the vocal methods here that it uses. So yesterday I searched over a couple of them in the project, and then I put some breakpoints to see if if they're gonna be called. But I found some functions that they receive the shader. So as far as I understand now, the way that it works on Vulkan is that the shader is compiled first, and then you send the binary to Vulkan to create the program. So you're not sending the shader code, you're sending the shader binary. And that Godot has on the build system, they have some functions that create the header for the shader to add some extra functionality. And this is another thing that is kind of confusing because I don't know what is the line between the build system and the C++ code. I don't know where exactly the shaders are created. So another thing I can do is just go to the files here that contain the actual shader code. But what I want to clarify is the whole pipeline in my mind on how the data on the C++ classes are translated into the shader to update the shader. Because then obviously I can use So one approach is going from the higher level, which is the editor, and then trying to figure out how the editor calls the functions to create the GUI elements. I think that's probably the easiest, and the other one is just going from trying to figure out from the Vulkan and shaders on the shader pipeline what is going on. But I think I have to do both to understand. So, and I found the class that they use to create the camera is just camera 3D. I think I put some breakpoint there. The main the main quote unquote function that initializes everything on the editor is the constructor, and it happens inside of the start there on the main start function. Before So the main start only runs once, and then setups the main loop class on the engine and setups the scene tree on the main loop. And then after that, there's the OS run function, which is the function that, depending on on which OS you're using, is just gonna call that function from that specific OS, which is an abstract syntax class that is derived from the OS class. Initial operational system is gonna have their own class, their own derived class, and that the run function on the derived class contains the main game loop. So I'm following this. I was following. I'm not really sure if I'm gonna follow now because I don't understand this other stuff. And I found this. So I'm thinking that might be better to figure out off stream, but maybe can try a little bit here. So this is I'm trying to create a Windows build because that's how I compiled. And I have some files on the default folder that they save things. I have some files that are for other operational systems builds, but they don't work. So this is the error that shows here. Then I think you can click here and then I already did this, install for file, which is the file that I got from the website, but not sure why it's not working. So it loads a little bit and then it just closes the thing. It might be a bug or something. I'm just gonna search for default or export templates. I'm gonna do actually Windows. And this is the thing that I followed, if I remember. Maybe I should extract this file first. Because from the videos that I watched, it seems that this is how you, after you create the game using the editor, then the way you distribute the game is just by exporting, and then you get whatever the result of the export is, and that's the stuff that you're gonna use to distribute the game. So I want you to understand how that works. Yeah, so this is the thing, it's not showing anything. If I delete this. Or it's working and it's something else that I have to do. Maybe double click on the file there. Oh, so this is the thing that so I think that the one that I installed is not working. So maybe I should extract that. So this is the default path. I think is roam something. App data roaming. User app data roaming. And user is going to be the user you have. So here there's files for other builds. I don't think I tried to open. But the problem is that obviously it's for Linux. I think I have to extract the other. Or maybe I have to do something here before. Not really sure. Because I remember one. I think I tried to save or do something before, and then it complained that I don't have a main scene. So maybe that's something that I have to do as well. Oh, it's probably better to figure this out off stream. It's not closing this. I'm gonna figure this out off stream. Try. Hey, I guess I can try something else. There's settings, export windows, receive. I'm not really sure if I. I'm gonna search what should I put on the RC edit. Whatever. So I'm just gonna close this. I'll figure this out. Maybe it's not even worth it to figure out from here. Might be better. Like I can go to the source codes and of the editor and then find where these GUI elements are on, and then try to understand the logic. And once I understand the logic, then it's gonna be a lot easier. But I assume that for some reason, like for some reason I think this is the file that is supposed to be used there on the export, and for some reason it's not finding this file. So I guess like the last thing that I'm gonna try is the problem is, yeah, from here is not gonna. If there was a way to put a path here, then I could try to find the path from this file here and try to put it. Or maybe I have to write some stuff here so I can read the file and then figure out what are the options. As I still don't think that's gonna change anything. Or I continue to, or I have to build something else here. Not really sure. So I'm just gonna step over the main thing that I want to understand first is what is the actual driver that is using when I run the executable. Because I remember seeing something related to Vulkan, but it wasn't it wasn't going on the control flow option that selects Vulkan. So I thought that for this executable that I'm running is running the OpenGL version. But then it's kind of weird because it doesn't have anything, like at least at first glance, it doesn't have anything related to the shaders. Because I assume that if when you're using the OpenGL version, then it should be the other way that it initializes everything, which is the way that I know. It's just gonna call gel, create program, and from if you search for gel create program, there's only one function, and I think that it's a function related to the D13 driver or whatever is the driver that Windows uses. I wrote down some functions as well from. Yeah, D3, D12. Just DirectX, I think, from Windows. So if we search here for gel, and this is PRV, so in Vulkan, it gets compiled down to this language actually. Either this language or binary, I'm not really sure. But I know that this is related. So this is an intermediate representation, which is a language that Vulkan uses to make sense of things. The gel create program. So yeah, outside of this third-party libraries, which is just the GL library, which is the interface for communicating with OpenGL, so it's function pointers and stuff like that. The only file that exists is this one, and it is related to. Oh, maybe it's not. So it isn't related to. I think I confused this one with some other function then. So, but I'm not really sure if the Vulkan uses this functions here. Which these ones, I'm pretty sure that they are creating the shader using OpenGL functions. So this GLE S3 is another, I think, header that allows you to communicate with OpenGL. So I'm gonna just go one by one. Try to skip the parts that are gonna be redundant. Maybe I think I should step into this again, even though I did it a couple of times already. Because I think that and this is the most annoying thing about stepping over this code, is because there's a bunch of things everywhere, and a lot of them are not related to the stuff that I'm curious about at the moment. So, but it's kind of hard to know if I should skip or not, because I might miss something that is important. But I don't remember if is this where the rendering the driver is initialized. Oh, so this is the function that I remember seeing. So I think this one is the one that creates, or see, this one creates the window, but I'm not really sure if it is related to driver or something like that. Probably the driver is going to be initialized on the setup function then before it initializes this one, because it's on this line here that it creates the window for the first time. Yeah. And here is where it initializes the file access and the directory access. And those files are the ones that are used to save things and create other files. I think I confused the selection of the what kind of driver is going to use with the first function there. And it just puts the display server initialization. And this is the stuff that I was talking about, process ID. That happens at this part here. I'm just gonna skip over this. So it maps on this process map. There is a hash that is gonna map process ID with process info. And I assume that this is related to the child process thing later, but I'm not really sure how. OS Windows. Oh, so this is from Windows. Hmm. So it's probably the functions that Windows uses to load the font glyph. It's just gonna be a texture that is a rectangle. I believe I wrote down this through here, but I'm gonna write down again. Maybe it's not. So I'm gonna leave it here, but it's probably not worth it to, because it's probably better to copy the way that the editor initializes or uses the fonts. That's what I'm more interested on. I'm gonna skip this one because it's just gonna insert. Not sure why he's inserting on the invalid files. It is inserting all of this. I guess it's just gonna use this to filter something later. So the files that are not allowed. Maybe these are extensions or I don't know. Let's see here. Ah, I'm gonna skip these ones because just annoying. This one I have to, I think I have to. But this happens all the time, which is the function, the way that they use malloc is like their own implementation of malloc. But maybe there's a inheritance or something like that. So I think it's better to go over this. Oh fuck. Shouldn't go twice there, but whatever. Skip this. Skip this as well. This one takes the longest time. I'm gonna go over the first method there, but it's a macro. Like these macros are probably gonna register these classes or these data types on the class DB, I think. It's just registering everything that the rendering server is gonna use, probably. The main thing that is kind of confusing to me. So the images are very good, but it's still confusing to understand. Uh, There's because in my mind there's a pipeline, the rendering pipeline, and then there is a flowchart of the classes, and I'm not 100% sure where each class falls into the pipeline. That's the part that is kind of confusing still. But the pictures are very good. Yeah, so this is the relationship between classes, and then editor node is gonna inherit from this node. So where the arrow is pointing is the inheritance. So node inherits from object, and node is the thing that is gonna be the main one used to create the scene tree is the main is the thing that manages all the scenes, and then each scene is gonna be its own sub tree on the main tree. The resources contain the mesh stuff. And this is what I mean. It's kind of confusing, but it is inherently complex. So trying to understand, like, I assume that obviously these classes here are going to be the ones that have the logic to create the shader code and to update the shader. and then they are used through here. On the extension modules part of the documentation there, they remember that the class you create to create a module has to inherit from the reference. It's called ref count, the class. So I think it's the base class, sure, but I'm not really sure, like, because there are some that are only objects and others that are only reference. So maybe the main difference is that the ref is related to resources and the object is related to stuff that is gonna show on the scene. The variant is just an interface from, I think it's for GDScript to understand what each thing is. And I remember seeing some stuff on the canvas that is related to uh, creating the geometry of things. But it wasn't canvas item, it was variation of that I don't remember really well. The spatial is for 3D and the other is for 2D. So I'm not really sure because I saw a bunch of functions inside of the class related to creating the shader on the server. I think that's what makes most sense. So these classes are the classes that hold the data to. So a parallel to 3PP, which is the C++ version of 3JS, is that you have the mesh. They have the mesh, which has the material and the geometry. The material is used to hold the data of that specifies what is going to be the type of the material you're drawing. The geometry holds the data that is going to determine the points in order to build the triangles that are going to build the geometry. So the both of them together create the mesh. So I think this is done here on these classes, and then the nodes. Nodes is probably going to have stuff related to the position and the other matrices of what happens with the object in the scene. So the local coordinates and stuff like that, and the camera. Maybe the camera is on the scene tree, but I'm not really sure. I guess this is a good question. So is the camera 3D on the nodes or the scene tree? Because if it is on the scene tree, then that means that if you create a game for 3D, then all of the scenes are gonna be, or maybe not that they're gonna be forced to. Yeah, I think it makes more sense for them to be on the node because then it allows you to select what kind of camera you want for each node. And probably that makes more sense. Because then depending on what kind of node you have, it's gonna have a different camera. So I assume that that's the case. So the camera is probably on one of these classes here. So once you structure all the data, then you send the data to the servers, and the servers contain the logic to create the programs. I think that's what makes the most sense. Oh, was one of this a variation of these classes here that I saw stuff related to the drawing or creating the data for creating the geometry for the GUI elements on the canvas. I think it was related to render canvas. Cool. So render canvas. I guess this is the thing it doesn't have on this one render class. So the question is, where does the render? I think the render comes after the server here. So the rasterizer. A rendering server. So I think it's between the server and the last one. Rendering device. I think that's what makes it has to be under drivers, I think. So the rendering is probably under drivers. So the servers create the logic to create the program. This class create the logic to build the data for the shader. These ones create the program, so they manage the shader code, which shader is going to be used, and the compilation, everything like that. So you send the data from this to this, and then from here you have the render, which is the thing that is actually going to draw the stuff on the. Yeah, I think that this part's confusing to me because it's going to depend on which kind of driver you're using, and that's why it's more complex. So I'm gonna step into one of them, and then I'm gonna do either. This is the problem that I had. Like if you put a breakpoint instead of one of these functions, it gets really annoying because then you can't step out of it because it's gonna stop. So that's kind of the problem. So this string, I assume that is not related to the function itself. So there's a lot of situations where this happens, where step into, and then it calls those functions. And the reason why it calls those functions is because there's a class called string, which is their own implementation of a string. It's just different than the standard string because of the way that they manage memory. So because they're using a different way to manage memory, which is the malloc stuff that they use there, which comes from the other external library, and there's the implementation that they use, which overloads the new operator and uses the memory class with the static alloc or alloc static, something like that. And the reason why they do that is because they only want to increase memory and they don't want to uh, remove and add. So you're always increasing the memory when you add stuff, as far as I understand, and never decreasing, which is different from the other malloc, from the standard malloc from C++. The reason why they did like this is because they prefer to sacrifice memory to gain speed. And the other reason I think is because of the fragmentation of memory. So whenever the program is using memory, there are situations where usually you're going to have different blocks of memory scattered around, and that's very inefficient because then obviously they're further apart, so it's kind of harder to uh, retrieve them. So I think that they have some stuff that makes sure that the memory is always on a continuous block, so that it's easier to get the memory. So because they use these classes, so there's all the classes, the main classes from the standard string, standard library, they use their own. They don't use the class of string, array, vector, stuff like that. So because they use these classes, there is a lot of these functions that these classes override. They have overload operators. So and then they have some functions that are the copy function. There is the main one. And what is happening is that because this is usually always the case where when you pass a string to a function, under the hood, what the compiler is going to do is just going to copy that function. So it's going to use a copy for choose on the inside of the stack, unless you pass a reference. If you pass a reference, then it just uses the same memory. But on the class that they created, they overloaded, I think, the functionality of what happens when there's a copy, and those are the functions that it shows all the time. And this string name, as far as I understand from something on the documentation, is different than the string because this one is more for strings that are going to be unique. So usually strings that you're going to put for a map, for example, so to access a map. So these kinds of string here, then usually it's recommended to use this one instead of the other one. But I'm not really sure why. Don't understand very well. And I don't care too much about this now because my main concern, main priority is to yeah. So this function here is the one that I'm talking about. So in this case, calling the constructor, and the constructor is gonna copy the string. There's pass here to here, and it's probably copying either because it's probably the thing is that it is a enum. I have to see what is the type there. So I don't understand really well what exactly is copying because this is supposed to be an integer. So maybe it's copying something else under the hood. I don't understand. But my main priority is to understand clarify the visualization, clarify how the rendering pipeline is connected to the functions on and how the editor uses them so that I can think about how I'm going to convert the matrices that I had on the other project to update the shaders in this one. Let's skip a bunch of this. Like I said, it's kind of hard to figure out when to skip, but I believe that I went over this a bunch of times, and it doesn't have any. It just gonna call the same of a bunch of these functions, Because the annoying thing is that it's gonna call a bunch of constructors because each one of these is using a bunch of constructors. And then it's kind of hard because if you go too fast, you get lost into all the other functions that it uses. I think just registering the variance types. This is the stuff that I was talking about that happens all the time as well. And the reason why it goes directly here is because they're overloading the new operator. So the macro that runs there, it uses the new operator. This is kind of confusing the way that the thing works, is that it doesn't show you the macro first. I'm gonna show once I run through this. And this is used all the time. This one is the one that I thought that was from standard library, but obviously, oh, maybe it is. So I remember that I went over this sometime. I think yeah, no, last time that I streamed, maybe it was a different function. So there's different. Maybe it was this one. But I'm pretty sure that it is a malloc function that is from the third library. Maybe it is from the third library. Oh, I think it's if I press F12. Yeah, that's the thing. That's the reason why it was confusing. So I think that they are using this one, probably, but maybe not because then there was a situation like this, similar. Yeah, it was on the 3PP. I think the problem is the debugger because I remember now. It wasn't on the 3PP. It was on the raylib. When I was stepping over the raylib code, there's exactly the same situation. Or I was stepping into the function and then it went to a different definition than the one that was actually being used. So I think that is a problem with the debugger. So because it's malloc, it's probably a similar signature. The debugger goes to the definition of the standard library, which is the path there to Visual Studio, but the one that is actually being used, I'm pretty sure, is this one. And this one comes from a kernel library, this Embry library here. Because otherwise, it wouldn't make any sense for them to like do all this other stuff. Like might as well just use the standard library malloc. But maybe there's a point to even if you're gonna use the standard malloc there because of the other functionality. But I think it's more likely that they're using this other function here, which is probably optimized for multi-threading and for the other style of memory allocation that they're using. But obviously, I don't know very well how this works yet. I think it's not worth spending the time now as well. So, and then here they use the standard atomic. So they use this class to manage the data. And standard atomic is used for multi-threading. So we have to multi-threading is use the atomic for because of databases. So when two different threads are trying to access the same data, there can be undetermined behavior because the value of the data is unpredictable. So in order to avoid this, you have to use these functions here. But I'm not really sure if these are the ones. So I'm gonna look into this again. I'm pretty sure that this. The thing is that the documentation doesn't explain very well. It just explains what the function does, but not how it works on the bigger context. But there are some videos that I've seen as well. I think it's just gonna add the thing there. But I'm pretty sure that there are other functions to lock the thread and to unlock. And I'm not really sure if these ones do that. Or maybe they just take into account that it might be locked or something like that. Performs atomic addition, automatically adds arg to the value pointed true by object. So it's adding a value on the atomic. So it's just expanding the data based on, so that function on the high level there that they're using. So when you create a class, you're just gonna add the class to this atomic. Yeah, it's gonna create a space in memory using the malloc from the kernel library. And then on this thing is just gonna increment the space on the atomic thing. That's what's happening. And the way that they do it there, when they on the macro that they have, they use a string to determine that where the data is going to be placed at, and the string makes it. This thing I have to look into again, but because I think ChatGPT just said that, and I looked into ChatGPT, Perplexity, and some sites I think, and they said that is on the current location, but I'm not really sure what they mean by that, because obviously it's going to be on the heap, not on the stack. So, and I'm going to search what this means. And this is for, there's padding as well. These are other functions from, I think is from the, from, I'm not sure if standard library is the correct way to say, but the Windows path there. Mem usage. So this is probably variables that they use to keep track of the space in memory. So the memory is managed by this class here, and they are, so you have a limit here, and this one is the current one probably, and then just added the bytes here that are allocated here, I think. That's what's going on. Oh, it's stepped over, whatever. So it gets the new memory usage, and then just increases the max usage. So once you hit the max usage, it's just gonna expand the space, and then it's never gonna decrease, I think. That's what's going on. So on this macro here, this is the one that I mean. That's, so it doesn't go directly on this one, but this one is actually the one that is running. It goes on the other one that is the new operator, because the new operator is being overloaded as a global thing. So whenever you write the operator overload functions on the global space, it's just gonna override for everything. So every time that you use the new keyword, because there is this operator on the global scope, it's just gonna change the functionality to use these ones. So it goes directly on the other one. But the thing that is kind of confusing is this thing here. So as far as I remember, that it says this is just a descriptor of where the memory should be at. So because when you allocate space, space on the heap using malloc or calloc on C++, it does the same thing. It creates like the first thing is a specifier is a pointer for the place in memory on the heap that you just allocated. But I think that if you're using malloc, it does that automatically if you're using the new keyword. And I think this is the difference. So here they are passing this to specify that the pointer should be to the current location, but I'm not really sure. So I'm gonna search this again. I'm gonna ask either ChatGPT or Perplexity. Placement new syntax. It's been new allows you to specify location memory where the object should be constructed, being used as the placement in the environment. There is some other part of the code, I think it's on the editor or something like that. Then instead of using the empty string, they create another class, which is a ref count. The ref count class, as far as I understand, is pretty much the same logic that they're doing on the other, like the same kind of thinking that they're using on the other parts of the code to change the way that the memory is managed. They're doing that with the ref count as well. So they are just creating that class to take control of over the way that the pointers are, uh, the logic of the pointers happen, let's say. So I think that's the main purpose of that class. And there's a bunch of classes that inherit from that class. So at one point in the code, they use that class to create a pointer, and then they use the pointer to pass as this thing here. So it's like they're creating their own customized pointer, I think. And put the same question on Perplexity to see gives a different answer. I was thinking about it yesterday as well, how I'm gonna do it, because I think what I'm gonna have to do, the thing that is very annoying, so there's two things. One is the build system when it comes to the shaders, and the other is the build system when it comes to the stuff that I'm trying to do. So ideally, like I said before, I will be able to get to a place where I can change whatever parts of the I can build the application that I'm trying to build straight from code, but there are some parts that it's probably better to use the editor, so like GUI elements and stuff like that to control. And the GUI elements are done using the 2D camera, which I think makes sense. So I forgot what I was going to say. Oh yeah, so I'm not really sure how I'm going to do it with because the way that it works, as far as I understand now, is they do the whole logic based on what kind of parameters you pass through the command line. So if you don't pass any parameters, or if you just pass the standard ones, like only the platform, then it's just going to compile to open the project first. And the main difference is what kind of scene is going to be displayed. So in the way that it is now, they always create the editor. Uh, I think they always create the editor, regardless of what kind of parameters you put. But then they display the editor if you put the parameters for the editor, and they don't display if you don't put parameters, or if you put the parameters to display the project. The project is the main thing that's going to allow you to select what kind of project you want to open, and the editor is the thing that you use to build the scenes, the game. So the thing that I'm not really sure is what is the best way to, should I change, instead of use the editor, I should change or use whatever project I'm building, or I should change, like spend a bunch of time trying to change the logic so that I can select which kind of thing is going to show from the codes. Not really sure like how to make sense of this. The connection between the application that I'm gonna build and the editor, because I want to decouple the stuff that I'm building from the editor, because I think it's gonna be faster, and I want to have the ability to not necessarily rely on the GUI elements to build stuff. But at the same time, it would be good to use the editor, so I'm not really sure what is the best way to connect them without coupling them too much. So this is the stuff that I mean that I don't understand very well. Which is typically, so I think that's what they mean when they said. So yeah, that makes sense. So like if you use the standard new operator and you don't put this stuff here, then what's malloc's gonna do, or calloc or whatever thing you're using to allocate memory, what's gonna do is just gonna get a random place in memory to put the stuff for the class on the heap. But if you use the strings here or you specify this, then what it does is just figures out what memory is currently being used to run the current program, and then allocates on that space, right after that space on the heap. So this makes it so that the memory is continuous, I think, instead of fragmentalized or fractalized. I'm not really sure how to say this. It's all over the place. Instead of being all over the place, it's just in one place. Yeah, I don't understand what it means by that. So like, what is the point then? So if it isn't on the same space, then what is the point of determining? I'll probably have to watch the video again from the guy explaining memory. 'Cause I think that it is likely that they're using memory pools, but I don't understand the setup first. So all these things are obviously connected, like the way that they overload the operators and the memory class. Yeah, that's exactly what they are doing. So I think the pre-allocated memory block is from the memory class on those variables that are global variables there. So the max memory and the mem usage and the max memory, I think, max mem. So that's probably the memory pool. And then because they're overloading the thing, then you know that it knows that it's going to use that space in memory. So what the string means is to use, it should allocate things on that space. So it's telling C++ to allocate the memory on the mem usage thing. So I think I understand now what's going on. I'm just gonna continue. Yeah, here, and this is the class. Yeah. I'm just gonna skip all of this because I don't think it's that important for what I'm trying to understand. And so this happens a lot as well. There's a bunch of classes. I think all the classes that use or they inherit from the RAF probably do this. So they call this instantiate. I'm not 100% sure, but I think that this is what it makes sense to me, that this class here is the one that's, they're just customizing the way that the pointers work. So I think it's basically gaining control over when you want to. I'm not 100% sure about this because of, I don't know if that's how, because I don't think C++ doesn't have a garbage collector, so it doesn't keep track of how many references each object has during the execution of the program. So I think this is the purpose of this class here, and it's the same thing that happens on. So yeah, in Python, I think that's the purpose of the garbage collection, and the higher level languages are gonna work like that. Where in Python, I'm pretty sure the CPython has every object has two main values. One is the data type, if I remember correctly, which is just an struct. It's a struct that is going to determine what kind of object it is on Python because everything is an object in Python, which is just a struct. So this struct, the main values that it has is the type and the reference count, which is what kind of things are using that object on the program. And then depending on the scope, it either decreases or increases the reference, depending on the scope and assignments. So I think this class is pretty much doing the same thing. And this instantiate here is related to this, so it's just allocating memory. Let me see something. And so it's going to be the constructor of the RAF. So this the type of the class probably. Yeah, T. And the other is the template for the arguments. Yeah, so because the way that you initialize these classes is like you do ref and then you pass whatever object you want to initialize a reference from. So it can be object or it can be engine, it can be anything that the thing uses. So this type here is going to be the T. This is just initializing the class inside on the way that you initialize the ref. Is initializing that class and allocating space and memory here, and then it uses that, it passes that as the constructor for the reference. And the arguments is whatever you want to pass, whatever the class needs to initialize itself. So T is the reference. Let me think about this. So there is just seeing if the class already has a reference, but I don't understand very well in the initialization there. It's loading from the atomic value. Let's save numeric. So it's loading from memory. I think it's starting to become a lot more clear in my mind how it works. So the ref is intrinsically connected with this other class, because one is going to manage the references and the other one manages the memory allocation. So it makes sense that they work together. I'm just going to skip most of this. There's another class that is called all the time. Now it's decreasing the thing on the memory. And removing the reference. So ref count, obviously as the name says, should be the amount of references that the thing has. I'm gonna skip this. So I think it is but the thing that I don't understand, so it's obviously like decreasing one reference here. If the thing, if the class was already referenced, so I think what is happening is that like when you initialize the class outside of the ref count, like the compiler automatically initializes and then creates a reference to that. But I don't think the compiler creates a reference actually. So if you initialize the class as a pointer, maybe. So maybe when you create a reference on the initialization, then and then you pass the reference to ref to initialize the ref. Then what ref does is just takes ownership over the reference, and it does that by decreasing the reference that already exists to compensate. But I'm not really sure if that's what's going on. And then the reference is gonna be on the thing that's initially a null pointer. So this is just quitting based on the type there. Yeah. So this is a type to the class that initialized the reference with. So I think what is happening is that like is allocating space on the memory pool for the class that you initialize the ref with, and then creating a pointer which is going to be the reference to that space in the heap to the class. Prefrom is the thing that is passing as an argument. Just checking to see if the from is the reference. I have to see what it was passing there. But I think it's checking to see if there is a self reference. Or maybe not. Same function from before. And now I don't understand why you made. Yeah, I'm also not sure if the parameters that it passed on the other function are these ones. The one that it checks to see if there's a from value and if it is equal to the reference. I don't think it is. Maybe something else. That's whatever. So the one thing that I'm gonna do first, see where this comes from. So it's a global thing and just a reference to this transition loader. I don't have to pass anything because it's just on the construction. Maybe you do have to pass. So if the class requires you to initialize with some values, then I have to pass. I think, yeah. I'm gonna try to go faster because there's too much stuff, so I'm just gonna skip this stuff for now. So I'm probably gonna do this a bunch of different times. So usually that's how it happens. The more experience I have, the more times I go through the cycle, the easier it becomes to understand what is going on. So it's just the Dunning-Kruger effect in the beginning, or like everything feels overwhelming because there's a bunch of different stuff you have to learn, and that's usually why people quit in the beginning because it feels like your body. There's a discussion on your body between your limbic system, which is our animal self, and your prefrontal cortex, which is our mind, to see what you're gonna do, and your limbic system is trying to make you preserve energy. So it's constantly trying to make you preserve energy and minimize risk. Because if you learn everything that is possibly that you can possibly learn, then you're not gonna function because there's too many things, so you're gonna be overloaded with information. In order to prevent that from happening, your limbic system creates ideas for you, which is called rationalization of over why you shouldn't learn something. So on this initial period, where it's very hard, it's kind of like your body telling your mind, asking your mind if you really want to learn it. Because if it's not very important to you, then what's going to happen is that you're going to rationalize and you're going to stop in order to prevent yourself from spending a bunch of energy. So, and that's the reason why it feels very overwhelming in the beginning when you're learning these things. But then if you go over this phase, then it becomes a lot easier because it's like the main and then this is the thing that it compounds on itself. That's the reason why. So it's kind of like the difference in gravity. So the limbic system creates a black hole, and I'm not really sure if the mind creates matter, but I think it does. Because like it's true is the exemplification of the electromagnetic field, which is the frequency of transformation of information. So over time, if you follow the limbic system too many times, what's going to happen is that you're always going to try to conserve, and maintain the current state of the universe. But that's not never going to be the case because otherwise time wouldn't exist. So time is the difference in states. So if you always maintain the same state, there is no time. So if you always listen to the limbic system, you're tricking yourself, and you're going to a downward spiral because you're living by your comfort zone, and that picks up momentum and mass, and that's eventually how people get trapped. And because other people know this, they use that to psyop you, so make you believe, just sell you the easy solution, so you don't have to. You think you don't have to work, but then over the long run, you're just becoming worse and worse. And that's the reason why it's kind of stupid to think about money, because the money is the effect, not the cause. So money is just a byproduct of computation. So if you focus on money, you're focusing on the results, and you don't have any control over the results. So it's kind of like listening to your limbic system. So you're being hacked essentially, because you're believing the illusion that you don't have to do the work, but that's not true because retirement isn't real. is not part of the space-time. So it's just a lie designed to trick you into the path of least resistance, which makes you weaker. But if you listen to your mind most of the time, then it creates a virtuous positive cycle of growth, where in the very beginning it's very hard because you have to spend all this energy, but then over time you get used to it, and then it compounds on itself like interest rates because you build yourself up, and then everything else becomes easier. So everything you learn becomes easier because you learn so many things and you have reference frames, and then you have more tools to use to learn other things, and that creates a positive momentum, a virtuous cycle of growth. But the downside of that is that it can get you overwhelmed as well, and then you run into paralysis by analysis because if you get too much information at the wrong time, then you can't act because your mind can see too many options and you can't do anything about it. So the balanced perspective, as always, obviously, is going to be a fluctuation of the two, which is the frequency of space-time. So everyone's always going to go from one side to the other because that's the distribution of how everything works. And then on society is going to follow Pareto distribution because 80% is going to be the mass of the collective consciousness, which is the people that create the wisdom and stability for society, which are the people that usually are going to prefer to listen to their limbic system because they're trying to, so they remain at the center because that generates more gravitational force. So yeah, that creates the mass of the structure, and then the people that don't listen to that are the ones that go to the surface, and then there's the risk-reward ratio of that, and then over time, what's going to happen is just the fluctuation of the waves of the, which is the political landscape. It's just people arguing about stuff based on the biochemistry because it creates different vectors of movement through space-time, and that creates the computation of the collective consciousness, which is just a neural network. It's going to determine how the environment changes based on the computation, which is how the markets work. So it's really dumb to think about money for that reason. So you should always think about the cause, not the effect, which is the computation, which is the first principles of the systems that create the money in the first place. There is a great video about some guy that I've seen that he does the analogy very well, but I'm not really sure if I remember. Maybe I should try to, because I want to use his analogy because I thought it's very good. I knew about the stuff before, but he puts it in a way that's easy to understand what is going on. And I think it was right or around the time that I was doing the Anki thing, and then yeah, I realized that it's like, because like I went through this process a bunch of times, but it's still very like kind of unclear in the background. But then the more you pay attention to it, and that's why I think it's important to meditate. Like this is the main reason. Like it allows you to gain clarity over what's happening. So you're more likely to catch the lies of your limbic system. But like I said, the optimal distribution is always going to be anywhere along the gradient because space-time itself is the convergence between the gradients, which are relative, and that creates a multifractal, which is the geometrical essence of space-time. So that's why in politics you have left and right and everything else, because it's always going to be like that because that is a reflection of the computation of the network that creates the illusion of space-time, which is the illusion of distinction because every boundary is a multifractal. So the optimal perspective is obviously going to be a distribution of the two, but human beings are imbalanced, and that's why you have a bunch of problems because they don't scale in space-time. So like the frequency of the distribution, which is follows a Pareto distribution when it's unchecked by politics, because we can't regulate ourselves because we don't scale on space-time. So it creates the vicious cycle in the macro perspective because we don't have enough coordination and shared meaning to regulate ourselves. So we get corrupted by money, and that creates the cycle of destruction. That's why it's dangerous with AI. It lacks balance. I can't find the channel, but so I'm gonna use, maybe if I find some other day, I'll talk about it. I forgot the name of the channel, but basically the analogy is that it's kind of like lifting planes. There's always a bunch of planes flying in the air at the same time, but they don't all take off at the same time because that would be impossible. So the way that it works is obviously that you have planes lifting off and going to the ground as several different times. So and that's the like learning something is lifting off the plane. So it takes a lot of mass, energy, and momentum in the beginning to take the plane off the ground. And that's how the universe works, because it's conservation of energy. It's just momentum. So the hardest part is changing the momentum. Then once you have the momentum, it's very easy, and that's why flying is easier, because it's already flying. So in the beginning, it's very easy, but then as you lift off a bunch of planes, gets to the point where you're flying a bunch of different planes at the same time, and it looks very easy, but realistically it was very hard in the beginning for each one. But because you lift off one at a time, then it's not overwhelming. I think that's a very smart way to think about it. And speaking of that, I have to do the Anki thing, so I think I'm gonna do the Anki soon. Because I forgot, I think I forgot yesterday. In a couple of days, I just did 5. So this is another thing that I'm trying to do, which I think is very good as well, is that, which a bunch of people recommend, and I agree, is that you shouldn't be too hard on yourself when you're trying to get a new habit or something like that, because then you're just gonna quit. So it's much better, much more important to keep the consistency and then try to increase over time. And then, like I said, it's always gonna be a gradient. So there isn't right or wrong, because it depends on your value system, because we don't know what happens after we die. So, and there isn't, like, the meaning of life is computationally irreducible, I think. So that means it's impossible to define the quality of things 100% with 100% accuracy, because it's always going to be relative because of the Heisenberg uncertainty principle. So what that means that there isn't, and this is the reason why I think that religion is stupid, because religion hijacks spirituality in order to control people. And the reason why is because of that. So when the Bible says that it's wrong to sin, it doesn't mean that it's inherently a wrong thing. It's just talking about the relationship of cause and effect. So it's like when Jesus says the people shouldn't sin, is like the same thing as saying that you shouldn't hit a wall very hard because your hand's gonna hurt. But he can't say anything about whether or not you should hit the wall because of your free will. So spirituality is about understanding the connection of the action and the effect that it's gonna have, not necessarily determining that one is better than the other. So it's impossible to say if it's better or not to hit your hand. In the case of the analogy, hitting your hand would be to exchange the temporary pleasure for long-term pain, or temporary pain for long-term pleasure, because eventually it's going to be the same, because everyone dies and then we don't know what happens. So, but what the problem is that what most people do is that they take the short-term pleasure in exchange for the long-term pain. But because they don't have the awareness over how their mind is tricking them, they are not very authentic when they're making that decision, because they don't know over their whole system what the distribution of values are. So in relationship to the gradient that makes up the thought process. And the problem with that is that when the pain for the pleasure that you take happens, you're less likely to take accountability for it, because you don't have the awareness of what kind of decisions you're taking that led to the pain you're feeling. So it's harder to correct. And that's what meditation helps, I think. So I think it's very important when you're trying to change your values or change the way you do things because of this relationship between uh, these parts of yourself that are going to determine how you're going to manage the distribution of energy you have for certain things. It's important to do them gradually and slowly. And it's more important to have consistency in the beginning instead of doing very hard. So this is something that I'm trying to get better at. Uh, and on these days that I didn't do very much because I'm learning all this other stuff about Godot and Vulkan, I think it makes sense to not do too much Anki because then it's overwhelming. So a couple of days I just did 5 repetitions, but I'm gonna try to keep that track because I think that it is helping me somewhat to do this, and I think it's something that is gonna compound the more times I do it. But the thing that is kind of tricky is that the most annoying thing about the Anki is building the cards. Takes a lot of time, and I got the cards from other people. So that's kind of the problem, is that the most effective cards are the ones you create because then obviously they're going to be related to stuff that you are curious about. But I think that is a good enough trade-off for now to just use other people's trade cards, because the main thing that I'm trying to achieve is just to get myself a lot more familiar with a bunch of different topics, because that way it increases the speed in which I can search for a bunch of things. It's not necessarily uh, memorizing everything exactly or knowing all the commands. It's just more about having on RAM. Not sure what's between RAM and disk, but more accessible memory. Not sure if this one is this. That's bugged. I'll do a couple of them so I hit the thing. I don't remember if this one is GATS or something else. So this is the thing that I have to do. I'll do it once I learn more the Godot and Vulkan, and I don't have to spend too much energy on that. I'm gonna for each prompt that I don't know what it is, I have to search in what context the thing is gonna be used. And I think that I'm not gonna do my own things for a long time. So it would be very good if people that watch this created different cards. That would be very nice. Because one of the main things that I want is to have cards that are for the methods that are used most often in C++ and this kind of things, but it's kind of hard to think about a good way to build the cards. Because that way I wouldn't need to search a lot to. So there's usually main patterns that I remember using since learning Python as well. Or for example, like obviously the simplest one is that you're always gonna loop over something, and then you're gonna call some methods, for example, string methods or stuff like that. So for that kinds of things, like to memorize that very fast on any language, I think it would be very useful because the overall fundamental pattern is always going to be the same. But what's going to change is the syntax and the memory structure. So if you could just memorize the syntax for all the languages, and once you internalize the pattern, you don't have to think about it anymore. It's just like straight from memory. I think it's new. Mm. I was confused the order of this one. Service response. maybe it's this one. I'm not sure if it's files or directory. Yeah, fine. This is the last one. Let's recurse over. I also have two counts there as well. There's a bunch of days that I didn't put on the total amounts that I'm doing. I said that I was gonna hit 1,000 and then move topics, but I think I have to do a lot more. I don't like the way that maybe it's not the way the problem that is organized there. So you can press the 1, 2, 3, 4 to determine how frequently you want the card to show again. That's what I was doing to pass from one card to the other. And I think I have to pass more times to the tree because usually I spend too much time on each card. So the thing is that it only unlocks new cards once you do the cards a bunch of times, or if you put them on the easier categories. So I have to rotate them more often. And I think it's going to take a lot more reps to remember all of them because it's a very big card selection. So I think I'm going to try to do maybe anywhere between 5,000 reps and 10,000 on that category before I move on to the other one. I was just passing the same reference. Ah, fucked it up. I wanted to see what is passing here, but I forgot to see there what it was. I think it is. It should be this thing here. It should be the T. So maybe it's checking to see if it was already initialized, or if the reference that the thing has is not really sure. Because this is a function that is called. So maybe if you pass a class, if you initialize a ref with a class that has ref as well, or inherits from ref, then it's gonna be the same there, maybe. I don't understand that very well. I think I'm gonna stop streaming here, because I'm kind of tired. I'm gonna continue to step over this off stream and watch a bunch of videos to learn Vulkan more. This is kind of the problem with stepping over this. There's so much things, so many things. So maybe if I skip a bunch, and usually I spend too much time on either one, so I have to keep in mind to go faster on all of them. So like gain the surface level first on all of this stuff, and then once I figure out, yeah, I need to be mindful so that I go deeper on the parts that I'm interested on right now. That's what I have to do. Because usually I step into each theme because I'm curious about how it works. I'm gonna step into the first time on this one, the other ones but I assume it's just gonna register the class there. It's gonna register this class on the database. Just calling the constructor for the class. So you're just gonna call the create. So I guess when you want to pass, when you want to register a class on the class DB, you have to have this create function thing. This is probably gonna be used. It creates a pointer to this function, the class DB. So whenever something wants to use that class, then the class DB is just gonna call this function here, which is gonna call the create function for the class. But I think that probably this create function is gonna be from one class that is probably gonna come from the ref count or something like that, which is a class you should always inherit when you want to add stuff. And I'm thinking about this because of the modules. The modules explanation on the documentation, or pretty sure they tell you to use to inherit from ref counted. Whatever. Let's skip over this. Input map is gonna be obviously the class tree handle the inputs, the class tree handle the project settings. And because I have a bunch of breakpoints there, I can't really get out of that. So I think this resources is initializing all of the, or a bunch of different classes. I'm not really sure what's going on. Fuck. So I think it's initializing all the classes that's inherit from resource, maybe? And it's weird because it's calling, always calling the same function. If I go on the other one, but sometimes I was gonna say that I was gonna put a breakpoint to run F5, to press F5 and then run the thing, but sometimes when you put F5, it doesn't work because it's gonna stop on the breakpoints and then just have to press F5 a bunch of times and then like you're not sure when it's gonna step out of the thing you're on. So like it's kind of tricky because you don't want to go too far. This is what I mean. It's kind of annoying to go over this. I think I'm gonna try to do this as OS Windows, or maybe as something somewhere else. Where's the main setup function? Let's see if I can find by name. And now I remember, like, it's a problem because there's this other setup true there. So I'm not really sure in which one I'm on right now. I was thinking about putting a breakpoint there because I'm not able to get out of this, stepping out. Shift 11 doesn't get out. And F10, which is step over, also is not getting out. And it is because of the breakpoints, I think, that I have. Also, I think that's oh, maybe not. I was gonna say that maybe the reason why it's only going over the input class is because that's where the breakpoints are. But when I press F12, it also F10 to step over. It also goes through the same classes. I think I'm gonna stop here. I'm gonna see if I can show the functions that I found that are related to the shaders, and then I'll stop. Or maybe I should just, yeah, if I press F5, but it's gonna get stuck here. Or if I remove the breakpoints there. I'm gonna see if I can find and remove. Oh fuck. It skips the one. Okay. Or maybe, so I'm gonna remove this one. So I'm pretty sure that I put breakpoints on the Vulkan stuff related to the shaders that I thought might be interesting to see. But the problem is if I press F5 a bunch of times, then it might skip the function that initializes the driver. That's the thing. But maybe it comes after the function that initializes the window. So, and I'm pretty sure I put the breakpoints on the, but maybe I removed the breakpoint at some point. The function that initializes the window. So the main thing that, like the first thing that I have to clarify is where exactly is the driver that is being used selected, if it's OpenGL or Vulkan. Then after I figure that out, then I have to clarify. I think it's probably Vulkan that is using it, but I'm not 100% sure. If it is Vulkan, then I have to clarify the whole pipeline of how Vulkan is gonna create the shader programs and what kind of shaders is using to create the editor. Then I have to go into the editor code and figure out what part is responsible for creating the viewport and how are the shaders on the viewports created. So it's probably a good idea to. I'm gonna watch videos, I think, about it, how to create the meshes from the editor, from the GUI, so I understand. Because I know that you can put your own shader code on the editor to create your own shaders, and I assume that that is probably one of the ways that people create the whatever is gonna happen on their game, and the other way is just the standard shapes that they have there. So those are the two main things that I want to see. I'm probably going to use the main shapes that they have because the stuff that I'm trying to create is relatively simple. It's just maybe for the arrow that I'm trying to create, I'm going to have to do a custom shader because it's just going to be maybe actually I don't need the custom shader. I think it depends on the way that they do the positions because I can just get the data, the way that they build the points from the other project, and then just incorporate that into this one. I think that's probably the easiest way. But the issue is that I remember seeing some functions that they use and they create polygons or something like that. So it's probably different the way that they, yeah, but yeah, that's the thing that I have to clarify. Yeah, the shader language that they use on the custom shaders is also a different language. So I have to see how they're doing that. Oh, okay. So next time I had the breakpoint here, but I removed. I'm just gonna put there so I can press F5 and skip the whole thing. So far, I think that there isn't anything that is related to the initialization of the driver. I put this stuff in. This packet data, I remember seeing somewhere. I think I saw somewhere with the engine. I'm not really sure if it's used to create the material or the meshes, something like that. But I remember seeing this on the somewhere along the editor code. So here is maybe we should put a breakpoint here. That's where it's gonna change depending on whether or not you put path. I'm gonna step over so it doesn't take a bunch of time, but maybe some other time I'm gonna see what is going on there. I think this thing I remember that is kind of annoying. So I think he's looping over the command line arguments on this function. So it's gonna call this giant all this stuff here a bunch of times based on the while loop there, but I don't remember really well if that's the case. Yeah, while. So it's just parsing the command line arguments and it's gonna run this code a bunch of times. Let's see if I can find the closing thing here. So if I wanna get out of this, I can just press F5. I do wanna see the globals there, the parts that I stopped now. So it's gonna be here. Put one here. Oh, it's already over. I'll leave it there for the next time. I remember stepping into this one as well, but I'm not sure. I think it isn't where the driver is being set, but I don't remember. And this one is probably interesting. initialize the config file. It's gonna be the ref. So we save there on this path. If you want to have cached scenes, you just save on the path. On this path here. So on the config file, which is gonna be the go.config, you can put the. So yeah, I'm probably gonna be. I'm not sure if it's gonna show anything. I'm pretty sure it's on this file here, the config file that is going over there. I wanna see. So it should be scenes groups cache. Maybe I don't have. Yeah, I don't have anything here. But I remember on the executable there, on the other config file, that there was some things. And maybe I think it's this one. So maybe is this file instead of this one? I think it's either one based on the if statement there on the function outside. I don't think it has anything related to the scenes though. So maybe I don't have here, but you can put if you want to load cached scenes. I wanted to see what kind of format it was gonna be. Or maybe it should be another file with that name. It's gonna open the file. I'm pretty sure I went over this function sometimes. I'm just gonna skip over this so it doesn't take too much time. So maybe this one. The thing is, it could be any one of these that initializes the driver. It's kind of annoying. MSDefGen is an external library, if I remember correctly, and is used to load fonts. It uses multi-sign distance field, which uses the three channels for the colors RGB, and creates sign distance fields based on that to create the fonts. So they're using MSDefGen to create the fonts. So maybe I'm not really sure how it's related though with the Windows function that I called before. So maybe that one is the default one, and then the uses this one, or the other one is for the project, and this one's for the editor. I'm not really sure. And navigation is kind of interesting. I guess this one is interesting as well. so have to go on each one, I think. Oh, I guess it's because so these are external modules. Oh, so it uses the Windows font if you don't allow the. So you probably should pass some parameter, I think, on the command line if you want to use these modules. So modules is kind of like a similar to plugins. The third party libraries are the official like external libraries. And the modules is similar to our third party library, but it's more like a it's different than an extension, but it's just added functionality to the thing. And it's on this folder here. So I guess whenever you want to use one of these modules, you have to specify on the command line or something. And because I didn't specify anything, it's just yeah module initialization. Just gonna go return on each one. This is initializing some protocol, SH protocol. Oh, maybe. So I think it's this one. GLS slang. Yeah, I remember. I think this is related to the shaders. Shader side compile. Okay, so I found it. So this is gonna be the first one. So this is the first time that it's initialized the shader. Pretty sure. So it's compiling to. So it is using Vulkan, because Vulkan is gonna use sperv, whatever, however you say this. Sure, why it didn't go here. Oh, this is the one that's. So this is initializing the shader module. It's probably an external module that helps you compile the shaders. I thought it was related to SSH, just communication, but yeah, it's for the shaders. So just storing the function that is going to be used on the rendering device. It's going to be this one. This one is probably it probably comes from GL. Yeah, so the way that it works is that if you don't pass anything by default, you're just going to use the external module, which is this module here. And this module contains the function to compile the shaders into the intermediate representation for Vulkan. Now I understand. And then it's registering on the rendering device. So the rendering device class is the class that is going to be used. Sure. I think it's rendering device. Yeah, this class here on the end. And I think that this comes after the servers. But this class is the one that is used, sure. So it's rendering device to compile the shaders and create the program. So it comes after the server, I think. Thing is that there isn't like it's not explicit here, but I think it's the only thing that makes sense. Yeah. Yeah, so I'm pretty happy about this. It clarifies a lot. So all I have to do now is just study the functions on the external module there to understand how to compile and then clarify the other parts. But now I think it's a lot easier because then on the editor level, because the thing is like I don't know the nuances because there's so many things going on the editor. But from the surface level step over that I did, it seems like a lot of the functions that is very similar to 3JS, obviously, and the other libraries. The main functions that draw from the higher level, which is the functions that the editor is calling, they're just changing data on some of these classes that are used to create the mesh and to create a program. So it's like it is creating the thing, but it's kind of like creating by proxy. Just like so, if you're just stepping over the higher level, it's difficult to understand what is going on because it depends on how everything was set up in the beginning, and that's kind of the thing is confusing. So clarifying here is gonna make it a lot easier to understand on the higher level what is going on uh, once they are changing the data on these classes to draw the GUI elements of the editor. I'm gonna skip over this because it's probably doing the same thing for all of them or most of them. The one that mattered was the shader for now, the one that I'm interested on. I'm just gonna skip. Yeah, I think that this is a good place to stop. So I'm gonna continue to do this. I'm probably gonna watch a bunch of Vulkan videos to try to understand the pipeline more. And I'm gonna continue to step over this. The main goal is to figure out, to clarify how the editor creates the GUI elements and what kind of shaders exactly are used, and then how I can set the values on the shaders so I can draw my own stuff using the shaders. That's the main thing that I'm trying to clarify now. And probably what I'm gonna do next is to try to create a module. So I'm gonna study all these things off string, probably step over a little bit more, and then try to create a module. Or change the editor code to see what happens on the when I initialize. So yeah, I'm not really sure when I'm going to stream next, but yeah.